The following episode features a historic article from the Nebraska History magazine. This article may reflect the language and attitudes of its time, and while it offers valuable insight into the past, may contain expressions or viewpoints that are outdated or offensive by today's standards. Any outdated terms do not reflect the current views or perspectives of the Nebraska State Historical Society. Welcome to the Nebraska History Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Goforth. Each episode, we explore articles written and published in Nebraska History magazine. This year, America is commemorating and celebrating its 250th anniversary. In today's podcast, we travel back 150 years to America's 100th anniversary celebration and Nebraska's impressive appearance in the Centennial exhibition through the 1976 Nebraska History magazine article, Nebraska in the Centennial Exhibition at Philadelphia, 1876, written by Ann P. Diffendahl. International expositions to exhibit the products of a burgeoning industrialization were held in the major cities of Europe and the United States during the latter half of the 19th century. Exhibitors and visitors joined to celebrate man's ability to fashion new products in his factories and to increase the output of his farms. The pattern for these World's Fairs was set by the International Exhibition, popularly known as the Crystal Palace Exhibition, held in London in 1851. The show was followed by others, including the Paris Universal Expositions in 1855 and 1867, the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago in 1893, and the Trans-Mississippi and International Exposition in Omaha in 1898. To commemorate its centennial, the United States sponsored a great exhibition in 1876 and invited the world to join in honoring the industrial and agricultural achievements of the country. By the time of its closing, the Centennial exhibition at Fairmount Park in Philadelphia included exhibits from 37 states and territories and from over 50 foreign countries. The official attendance was set at 10,164,498 people. Formal preparations for the exposition began March 3, 1871, when Congress passed an act to provide for celebrating the 100th anniversary of American independence by holding an international exhibition of arts, manufacturers, and products of the soil and mine in the city of Philadelphia and state of Pennsylvania in the year of 1876. This law established a Centennial Commission composed of one commissioner and one alternate from each state and territory to be appointed by the president from nominees submitted by each governor. On June 1, 1872, funding for the exhibition was authorized by another act of Congress, which provided for a board of finance organized as the corporation and empowered to raise $10 million through the sale of stock. This board would consist of 2 incorporators from each congressional district and an additional representative from each state and territory. Shares of stock were apportioned among the states and territories according to population. Nebraska, ranking 36th out of 47 states and territories in population, received a quota of $31,900 to be raised by the sale of 3,190 shares of stock at $10 each. Governor Robert W. Furness initiated Nebraska's involvement in the Centennial exhibition when he appointed Henry S. Moody of Omaha to be the state's representative on the Centennial Commission and himself the alternate. These appointments were confirmed by President Grant in time for Moody to attend the first meeting of the commission in Philadelphia on March 4, 1872. In order to secure support and cooperation throughout the nation, the commission recommended the formation of state boards of Centennial managers. Furness promptly responded to this suggestion, and on November 26, 1873, appointed the following men as the original state Centennial managers for Nebraska: Daniel H. Wheeler of Plattsmouth, J. Sterling Morton of Nebraska City, General James S. Brisbane of Omaha, W. D. Scott of Rouleau, and Guy C. Barton of North Platte. In August 1875, Charles F. Manderson was added to the board upon the resignation of Brisbane. Although the announcement of these appointments was generally received with approval, Furness did not escape criticism entirely. The editor of the West Point Republican tried to revive an old factional controversy which had persisted as a theme in Nebraska politics since territorial days. He claimed that Furness had slighted Nebraskans living north of the Platte to favor those south of the river in his choice of Centennial managers. He also called for the resignation of Furness as a Centennial commissioner, arguing that Furness should not hold both this position and that of governor at the same time. A reply by the Omaha Bee seemed to quiet the argument with the remark that, quote, 3 of these managers, Mr. Morton, Wheeler, and Scott, reside south of the Platte, while the other 2, Mr. Barton and Brisbane, reside at North Platte and Omaha, respectively. Mr. Barton represents more than half of northwestern Nebraska in the state Senate and will certainly pass unchallenged as a North Platte man, end quote. The Bee also saw no objection to Furness serving as commissioner since the president of the commission, General J.R. Hawley, had been governor of Connecticut when appointed to the commission and was then serving in the United States Congress. The Bee did, however, object to the commissioners for another reason. Editor Edward Rosewater denounced Furness for, quote, his selection of members of what some are pleased to designate as the agricultural board ring. Some of the governor's best friends deprecate the narrowness of the circle within which His Excellency seems to seem all the wisdom, virtue, and patriotism of Nebraska, end quote. The appellation agricultural board ring, although pejorative, was not completely inaccurate. From 1873 through 1876, Furness, Morton, Brisbane, Wheeler, and Barton, all Nebraska Centennial commissioners or managers, were also officers or board members of the Nebraska State Board of Agriculture. Other members of the board who were subsequently to be involved with the Centennial Exposition included Moses Stocking, James W. Moore, and Governor Silas Garber. Furness could have countered Rosewater's charge by observing that because the State Board of Agriculture was responsible for the Nebraska State Fair, he could not have chosen a more experienced group of men to direct Nebraska's participation in this international fair. Neither the reference to the north of the Platte, south of the Platte division, nor the charge of political favoritism in choosing Nebraska's Centennial officers sparked a controversy. Nearly 2 years passed before any serious concern in Nebraska about the state's role in the Centennial exhibition appeared. During 1874, the Great Plains was plagued by grasshoppers, and the destruction caused by this pest turned the state's attention from any other concern. In his message to the legislature on January 18, 1875, Furness recommended that it consider Nebraska's participation in the exposition. The House appointed a Committee on Centennial Matters, but took no further action. At the same session, however, the legislature approved the issuance of bonds in the amount of $50,000 to provide, quote, seed for citizens of counties devastated by grasshoppers, end quote. While most Nebraskans struggled to recover from the insect attack, some men still wanted to see the state represented at Philadelphia, if only in a modest way. On August 7, 1875, Furness's successor, Governor Silas Garber, issued a proclamation calling, quote, all persons interested in having the state of Nebraska represented at the Centennial Exhibition to a meeting at Grand Central Hotel at Omaha upon the 18th day of August. A full attendance is desirable, and it is hoped that each county may be represented, end quote. It was impossible to expect persons from all of the counties to be present on such short notice. Douglas and Lancaster counties provided over half of the 37 persons who appeared at the meeting. Webster and Hall counties were also represented. The gathering considered 2 general topics: the sale of Nebraska's share of the Centennial stock offered to the public, and the means by which Nebraska could be among the exhibitors at the exposition. Most of the members of the Board of Finance appointed to direct the sale of Centennial stock were present: former Governor Alvin Saunders of Omaha, E. H. Rogers of Fremont, John I. Reddick of Omaha, Colonel David Remick of Pawnee City, and Colonel A. J. Cropsey of Lincoln. Only State Auditor J. B. Weston was absent. To that time, Nebraskans had purchased none of the state's quota of the stock for sale to the public. Proceeds from this stock were to pay for the general operation of the fair and not to finance the exhibit by the state. The Board of Finance resolved to promote the sale of stock in various counties. The Assembly next considered ways of collecting and transporting Nebraska products to Philadelphia. It resolved to raise money from private subscription and from banks and other corporations. to call for a special session of the legislature to make an appropriation, and to request that each county organize a society to secure donations and products for the exhibition. A committee was appointed to urge Governor Garber to see that Nebraska would be represented at Philadelphia. This meeting spurred some local activity on behalf of the fair. The sale of Centennial stock began, although slowly at first, in Omaha, Plattsmouth, and Fremont. Residents of Nebraska City and Otoe County met in late August to choose delegates to gather local products for exhibit. On October 6th, the meeting was held to arrange activities in Omaha and Douglas County. The State Board of Centennial Managers appointed one man in each county to oversee arrangements for collecting products and urged Garber to call special session of the legislature. Although the idea of a special session received support from many people, the legislators were never called together because the expense would have been too great to justify the purpose. As May 10, 1876, the date for the opening of the exhibition approached, Nebraskans had made no adequate effort to assure the state's presence in Philadelphia. Furness, in the city to attend the meeting of the commissioners in late April, observed that other states were at work on their displays. He was impressed with the efforts of Kansas, which was erecting a separate exhibits building to be shared with Colorado. Moved by the approach of the fair's opening, Garber began to make arrangements for a Nebraska exhibit. First, he confirmed a reservation of space in Agricultural Hall, one of the main buildings on the grounds. Next, he secured promises from the land agents of the Burlington and Missouri and the Union Pacific Railroads to ship any materials collected. He prepared a letter, which was printed in newspapers throughout the state, calling upon Nebraskans to forward goods, especially agricultural products, to him. He took out loans against the credit of the state from banks in Omaha, Lincoln, and Nebraska City to pay expenses. And finally, he went to Philadelphia to attend the opening of the exposition as well as to receive the shipments of Nebraska products. The governor's party, which arrived on May 9th, consisted of the governor and Mrs. Garber, State Treasurer General J.C. McBride, and Secretary of State Bruno Tashuk and his wife. McBride described their journey for the Lincoln Journal, stating, quote, "Saturday noon, when we left Lincoln, it rained. It did the same thing on Sunday and Monday. Today is Tuesday, and still it rains. If my name were Noah, I should build an ark, but it isn't. We arrived safely this morning at 3:15 and were met at the depot by the father and brother of General Roberts, who escorted us in good style to the Girard House, where we are to be permanently located. Every hotel is filled to overflowing, and the prospects are that Philadelphia, with her 500 hotels and boarding houses, will not hold half of that will come to visit," end quote. The state officials, joined by the Nebraska congressional delegation, attended the opening ceremonies. They enjoyed some attractions of the fair, but were shocked by the high prices. A correspondent for the Omaha Daily Herald reported that, quote, "Governor Garber and lady and State Treasurer McBride and lady went into the French restaurant and took dinner, which was very plain, nothing extra. And when they called for their bill, which was $9, they remarked they did not wish to buy the establishment and settle their bill, but took good care to give that establishment a wide berth since," end quote. When it was time to leave, McBride wanted to remain longer, but said that because, quote, "Union Pacific stocks are falling, the state treasury won't allow him to pay for $9 dinners anymore," end quote. Meanwhile, preparations for the Nebraska exhibit continued. John C. Bonnell, secretary of the Burlington and Missouri Railroad Land Department in Burlington, Iowa, designed display cases and planned the arrangement of items. The cases arrived in Philadelphia during the first week of June, and the exhibit was in place by June 17th. The Nebraska display, occupying 750 square feet in Agricultural Hall, was formed by 10 walnut cases, each 12 feet tall, arranged in 2 semicircles on either side of a rectangular display case. The 10 cases each contained 61 diamond-shaped compartments covered with glass and filled with samples of grain, seed, and soil. The panels at the top of each case contained the following legends in gold lettering. Nebraska, the great middle farming and stock region. Nebraska, the best for corn, wheat, hogs, cattle, and sheep. Nebraska, the summers genial and pleasant. Nebraska, the great central region. Nebraska, the champion state for fruit. Nebraska, on the route across the continent. Nebraska, springs and streams in abundance. Nebraska, winters mild and short. Nebraska, virgin and productive soil. Nebraska, the loess soil her foundation. The rectangular case in the center held farmers' tools, and below on the floor were more agricultural implements. On a table rested a register in which visitors signed their names. A handsome leather-bound volume trimmed in gold, the book had been made especially for this purpose by the State Journal Printing Company in Lincoln. Also on display was a portfolio of photographs bound by the State Journal Printing Company. The photographs, made by V.H. Young and S.S. Dennison of Lincoln, included views of the University of Nebraska and scenes of interest in other parts of the state, including locations along the Burlington and Missouri route, on the Blue River, and the Normal School at Peru. At first, R.R. Randall of the Burlington and Missouri in Lincoln was present at the Nebraska display to greet visitors and distribute promotional literature published by the railroad. Later, James W. Moore of Nebraska City replaced Randall. The state's official exhibit was not the only evidence of Nebraska's presence at the Centennial exhibition. Regular columns in their newspapers kept Nebraskans informed about the fair. Many Nebraska newspapers carried a weekly column which was supplied by the press department of the exhibition. The Centennial directors encouraged publicity by establishing a press committee which distributed nearly 5,000 press passes to newspapers all over the United States, released new items, and provided plates from which magazines and newspapers printed views of the grounds and the buildings. Accredited newspapermen had access to desks and stationery, as well as postal and telegraphic facilities at a convenient location on the fairgrounds. More facilities for the press were available at the American Newspaper Exhibition in the Newspaper Pavilion, an exhibit sponsored by Messrs. George P. Rowell and Company, a newspaper advertising agency. This building housed a current file of nearly every newspaper then being published in the United States, including those in Nebraska. Visitors stopped at the reading room to catch up on the latest news from their hometowns, while correspondents filed their stories from desks on the second floor. Some Nebraska papers carried news of special interest to the state. The Omaha Herald kept a correspondent, B.M. Brake, in Philadelphia during the exposition. Brake, a former editor of the Lincoln Spy, wrote under the pseudonym General Bick and reported on displays and special events while he complained about the hot weather and the high prices of food and accommodations, writing, quote, "Hottest. No other form of the adjective will express the fact. The glass registers the 90s and now and again passes over the hundreds. But what would be endurable on the plains is simply indescribable in Philadelphia. We don't perspire, we melt," end quote. The heat did not melt Brake's enthusiasm for the exhibition, as the following demonstrated, quote, "Probably the world has done about its best in this friendly tournament of trade. The utmost present possibility of the nations is here represented. It is magnificent. It is more. The whole grand display is a unit. There is almost infinite variety in details in arts and manufacturers, but through all slight specific differences, the type is one. It is manifest from man's work that the whole world is akin, that humanity, from India to the poles, is a brotherhood. This latest demonstration of the old fact is not without significance. We shall not be indifferent to it in Nebraska, where we are making a nation out of peoples and races many," end quote. Brake also sent for publication in the Herald lists of Nebraskans who signed registers kept at press headquarters and at the Nebraska exhibit. He stopped that practice, however, when he discovered that many people who never attended the fair had themselves registered for the prestige of seeing their names in print. None of the other Nebraska papers had a regular correspondent. The Lincoln State Journal ran several columns from Skimmerhorn's Boy, written by State Treasurer J.C. McBride, when he attended the opening of the exhibition. The Omaha Bee carried many unsigned columns on the fair, probably written by editor Edward Rosewater from information gathered on his personal visits to Philadelphia. Rosewater, a supporter of Rowell's American newspaper exhibit, had contributed money to help pay for the construction of the newspaper pavilion. The number of Nebraskans who attended the fair is impossible to determine. Reports about the high prices of food and hotel rooms, together with the cost of transportation, may have kept many at home. By September, some railroads reduced the round-trip fare between Omaha and Philadelphia from nearly $60 to about $45 in honor of the Centennial. Nebraskans journeyed to Philadelphia to participate in a variety of activities at the exposition. An unidentified Nebraskan exhibited horned cattle. Another Nebraskan exhibited several articles in the shoe and leather building. Edward Neve, an Omaha dentist, exhibited a set of false teeth that he had made. A delegation of the Nebraska Lodge of the Knights of Pythias went to Philadelphia to join the Centennial Parade of their order on August 22nd. Among the judges were Chauncey Wiltsey of Omaha in the furniture department and Moses Stocking of Wahoo in the sheep and wool department. Next to the state's own display, the largest Nebraska showing at the fair was that of the Nebraska Horticultural Society's pomological exhibit, one of the several special arrangements. This showing of fruits was held in Pomological Hall, a building designed for this purpose during the week of September 11th through 16th. At its July meeting, the Horticultural Society had decided to sponsor a display. A committee composed of J. Sterling Morton of Nebraska City, ex-Governor Robert W. Furness of Brownsville, Stephen B. Hobson of Mount Pleasant, and Hiram Craig of Fort Calhoun solicited specimens for exhibit and distributed packaging and shipping instructions. Upon Morton's suggestion, James W. Moore of Nebraska City took charge of the exhibit. Moore supervised the shipment of fruit and its arrangement in Philadelphia. He remained with the exhibit to discuss Nebraska and its products with interested visitors. Nebraska fruits, including pears, grapes, and apples, were displayed in competition with those from many other states, as well as from Canada. The Horticultural Society received an award for its pears, which were pronounced, quote, large, smooth, and well-colored, end quote. It received another award for its apples, which the judges described as, quote, a remarkably fine collection, and honored for its unusually large number of finely grown specimens of excellent varieties, also for the general freedom from insect markings, fungus, and weather discolorations, end quote. Each of these awards, like all others at the Centennial exhibition, brought with it a bronze medal and a diploma, which carried the report of the judges. The final Nebraska contribution to the exposition was an address of the geology, the topography, soil, natural history, and weather of Nebraska, delivered by Professor Samuel Owie of the University of Nebraska. The Centennial Commission had requested the governor of each state and territory to appoint an orator who would deliver an address on the history and growth of the state. The addresses were to be collected and published. Governor Garber, sensitive to the factional distrust between residents living on either side of the Platte River, appointed two orators for Nebraska. J. Sterling Morton was to represent the area south of the Platte, and Owie that of the north. Initially, Owie expressed misgivings about the value of the exercise. He doubted that many people would listen to a speech when confronted by all the other attractions of the fair. He was also reluctant to leave his duties at the university for the event. Finally, the two men agreed upon October 26th as the day to deliver the speeches and divided the topics between them. Morton was to speak on the history and social conditions of Nebraska, Owie the natural history and the physiography. In spite of Morton's enthusiasm for the project, there is no evidence that he ever spoke at Philadelphia. Owie delivered his address in Judges Hall, one of 27 speeches given by representatives of various states and territories. The original plan of publishing the collected speeches was abandoned when too few of them were furnished in the Centennial Commission. After the conclusion of the exposition, Garber asked the legislature for an appropriation to cover the state's expenditures for the exhibit. He had borrowed $3,500 from several banks on the state's credit, rather than call a special session of the legislature, which would have cost more than the amount spent. He reported that the total cost of the display to the state was $4,509, most of which was paid to the Burlington and Missouri Railroad for producing the exhibit. The legislature responded quickly. The House approved the special appropriation with an emergency clause on February 12, 1877, and the Senate followed on February 15th. The governor signed the act on that same day. After many delays and some hurried final preparations, Nebraska was officially represented at the Centennial exhibition to mark the 100th birthday of the United States. Despite a small population, which had recently suffered an economic disaster, the youngest state, except for Colorado, which entered the Union in 1876, made a credible showing among the other states and territories, as well as foreign countries, which were exhibited at Philadelphia. Thank you for listening to the Nebraska History Podcast. To learn more about Nebraska History Magazine, to listen to more podcast episodes, or to support our podcast by becoming a member of the Nebraska State Historical Society, go to history.nebraska.gov/podcast. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and get notified when we release new episodes on your favorite podcast platform every other week. Until next time, I'm Chris Goforth.